In this section, we're going to discuss about port security. So port security basically used to prevent unauthorized access or limit the access in your network based on the MAC address. So suppose if you have a switch, a cable goes to particular cabin or a particular room to the outlet, and you don't want to access by unauthorized person. So let's say if some visitor coming to your this cabin or someone come to this cabin and they may have a laptop, they cannot attach their devices inside your network for accessing resources. So you may have a shared some file or some server, but you don't want to share with them because these devices are not trusted for your company or for your network. So where in this place we can apply port security. So based on the MAC address, we can deny to particular device or we can allow to particular device. So basically on particular interface, we can allow from 1 to 8192 MAC addresses. It actually depends on the platform of your switch. So maybe every switch, every platform not going to support the same amount, same number of MAC addresses to limit, but in my case it does. In port security can only going to apply on static trunk port and static access port. So make sure your port is static trunk or static access. It is not going to be negotiated. So what happen if limit exceed or violation occur? If someone looking to attach your network who is not authorized person. So if you enable port security on particular switch, particular port, so what going to be if violation occur? Your interface going to be pulled in shutdown mode, which basically means it going to send into error disable mode. So for enable that particular interface, for re-enable that particular interface, we need to recover, we need to configure disabled recovery, or we need to shut down and then after no shutdown that particular interface. So this is the default configuration if we enable port security on particular interface, but we can change like protect or restrict. In case of protect and restrict, they're not going to pull your interface or send your interface on error disable mode. They're simply going to discard the traffic. So traffic not going to send to your network from violator. So person who is violating the rule or violating your network, they cannot send traffic to your network if you have configured your interface as a protected mode, or a violation after take decision after violation, which is protected or a restrict. The difference between restrict and protected is in restricted or in restrict mode, it going to be generate some log like SNMP log or a sys log, whatever we have configured. So once we enable port security on particular interface, what going to be or what default configuration going to be if we talking about interface or all interface. So default configuration for port security is by default it is disabled on every interface. So we need to enable port security if we looking for prevent unauthorized access, executing command, switch port security. If we enable port security or particular interface, it's going to allow only one MAC address. If violation occur or more than one device want to connect to particular port, then violation going to be shut down that particular interface. After violation, your port going to be shut down as we discussed. And in default, there is no default configuration for recovering or for aging. So if you want to recovery without executing command shutdown and no shutdown, we need to configure either restricted mode or a protect, or we can also go for error disabled recovery. So if we're talking furthermore about the port security, your port maintain address table based on the static configure MAC address. So you can specify particular MAC address on particular interface, or a sticky if we have a larger network. Let's say if we have a thousands devices which is connected to your network or your switch, for example, and you don't want to configure individual MAC address manually on particular interface, we can use a feature like sticky MAC address. So whatever MAC address is or whatever device is connected currently going to be automatically configured on that particular interface, which is less secure, which is considered less secure, or by default it's going to be learned dynamically. So likewise, if you're talking more about the aging, we can go for configure MAC address aging. So suppose if we have a configure sticky MAC address or maybe a dynamic, but we limit there is only two MAC address can access to particular port. So what happen if after some time one MAC address is not active? So by default source MAC address, secure MAC address are learned permanently. So for example, let's say if I have a switch and this is a particular port, and currently we have allowed there is two device going to be connect. So it could be a device name A or MAC address A or a device name B. So by default it's going to put MAC address A and MAC address B permanently. So in order to access another device like device C, so currently we're going to allow only two MAC addresses or two secure MAC addresses, but it could be A or C or A or B or some other. In that case, we can use MAC address aging. And also I would like to discuss about, like on trunk port, you can limit number of MAC address on per VLAN. So if you have a trunk port, you can limit number of MAC address regarding VLAN number 1, VLAN number 2, and so on and so forth. But by default, it's going to be allow unlimited. One more thing, we need to take care about the port which is connected for first hop redundancy protocol. So you may have a router going through you have a router connected through a switch and performing first hop redundancy protocol. So make sure they're going to generate or create a virtual MAC address. Or you may have a port going to the IP phone, and then after IP phone it's going to connect to the laptop, desktop, or some other device. In that case, you're supposed to allow at least two MAC address to connect with that port. But there is a security concern. Using router security, using a router port security, using router security, using a router security MAC can be hide, which basically means, let's say if we have a switch and there is a cable goes to particular outlet, a person can connect a router and then after a switch, and suppose you allow only one MAC address learned by dynamic on this particular interface. So that MAC address going to be the MAC address going to be the MAC address of a router. So now your switch come to know that MAC address is a router MAC address. But after switches, person can connect thousands of devices. But whenever packet going to forward from the router to switch, the MAC address going to be the same. So no matter you may allow a MAC address A which is connected to the router, or maybe you consider this is a PC, but person can change it or can replace a router, and you have allow a dynamic MAC learning, and then after they can hide their PC or they can hide their MAC address using a router. So this is the security concern. So now we're going to configure these things on CISCO Gear. Now device is up and working, and for simplicity I'm going to use single switch to perform port security based on MAC address. So gig 0/2 going to be connected with my LAN or my production network, you can say, where we're going to apply port security. So before going to the actual configuration, I would like to verify my iOS. This is switch 2960 running iOS 15.0, as well as do so IP interface brief including only up interface. So my gig 0/2 is up as well as my VLAN. So let's select interface gig 0/2 and enable switch port security on this interface. So it's going to be rejected because by default ports are dynamic ports. So basically we need to enable or we need to disable, we need to disable negotiation. Like if we have another switch and there is a cable goes to that switch, so you can enable this interface as a trunk, so automatically other end going to be configured as a trunk or a access. So we need to configure it statically, either access port or trunk port, and then after we can enable port security on it. So switch port mode access, for example. Now we can enable port security on this interface. So if we enable port security, because by default single MAC address going to be allowed, so that's why we can see your port is going to be sent in error disabled mode. So currently if we're looking for the port security, let's say do so port security for interface gig 0/2, port security is enabled and the current status is securely down, and port status is, as we can see, it is set. And we didn't define aging time yet, and as we can see the maximum MAC address is 1. So what happen if violation occur? Interface going to be shut down, or actually technically it going to be sent in error disabled mode. So the last MAC address was this, and secure violation count is 1. So in restrict and protect it going to be increment whenever violation going to be occur, but in shutdown violation mode it not going to be increment. So we can also verify do so interface, let's say status error disabled. Gig 0/2 is error disabled. Even if we change the maximum MAC address, so let's say port security, switch port security maximum MAC address, in my case it's going to be support from 1 to 8192, let's say 1000. Obviously I do not have that much amount of devices which is connected to my LAN. So again it's not going to be up, because once your port going to be sent in error disable mode, we need to shut down that interface and bring it back. Either we can also configure error disabled recovery. So let's say I'm going to shut that interface and bring it back, and then after we're going to verify do so port security on interface gig 0/2. So now port security is enabled and status is up. Again violation is shut down, and since we didn't configure aging time, so everything is going to be same, and then maximum MAC address is 1000. So as soon as we going to, once interface going to be up, we can see we have more than 4 MAC addresses. So currently it's learn only 4 MAC address which is connected to my LAN, and as we can see interface VLAN is going to be up. So you can also configure error disable recovery, but I recommend you can use like protect or restrict. Before going to configure, protect and restrict, I would like to show one more thing. Let's say I'm going to revert the configuration. Default interface gig 0/2, and now interface gig 0/2 switch port mode trunk. So currently we define it going to work as a trunk, and we can enable switch port security on it. So switch port security, and then after MAC address, excuse me, it is a maximum, I think. Maximum, it is maximum, excuse me, maximum port, maximum MAC address, let's say 1000 for VLAN number 1. Likewise, you can put for VLAN number 2 1000 MAC address, for VLAN number 3 1000, and so on and so forth. So you can use, you can configure your trunk interface on that way, which is going to be you forward only thousands of MAC address only. In my case, I'm not going to do on that way. So let me disable switch port security, or let me change the switch port security violation going to be, let's say, restrict. Set the interface and bring it up. So do so port security interface gig 0/2. So now we have configured port security enabled, and we also need to define how it's going to be learn the MAC address. By default, it is dynamic. So by default, it is dynamic, and as we can see, it is violation mode restrict. Since it is working in restrict mode, again and again and again, or you can say over and over and over, it's going to be prompt violation occur or violation occur, because currently we have only configured we have configured only single MAC address. Because of that, or we can change the port security, switch port security maximum. Let's say in this case I'm going to allow 1000. So I'm not going to define particular VLAN, so it's going to be allow only 1000, and let's verify the current status. Now we can see the security violation count 35, and since we didn't define time yet, that's why it's obsolete. So let's say how we can define timing as well. In timing aging time going to work with I believe for protect and restrict. So let's say if we allow only 10 MAC address on this interface, and maybe you have 10 PC connected to your network, or 10 devices, what happen if another device going to move to some other network, or going to be disconnect, and some new device going to connect with your network? It's not going to be allowed by default, even after a long time, because by default it's going to be keep permanent those MAC address whatever device earlier connected to this interface. So to avoid this problem, we can go for aging. So let's like switch port security, and we have an option aging time. We can define aging time. We can define aging time, as well as, let's say for example, aging time going to be after 10 minutes. So if previous MAC address is not active on this interface, after 10 minutes I'm going to erase that counter, or I'm going to flush that counter. Likewise, we also need to define switch port security aging, and then after type. What aging type we talking about? Inactivity or obsolete. So in this option we need to configure inactive. So if particular MAC address is not active on this interface from last 10 minutes, I'm going to remove that MAC address from the configuration, and another MAC address going to be allowed. So you can configure in a such way as well. One more thing I would like to discuss again, which is, so rest of thing that you know, or we left sticky. Yes, I think you people know, but I supposed to go for how it going to learn the MAC address. So MAC address, and then after we can define manual MAC address, or we can use sticky command. So as we discussed earlier, on a sticky command, whatever device is currently connected with your interface going to automatically configured or consider as a secure MAC address or a trusted MAC address, you can say. Or you can use manual, but by default it's going to learn the dynamic MAC addresses. So the things which I like to discuss, yes, this one. So it was actually insecurity. So using a router in security or unsecure MAC address can be hide. What is mean by this? I would like to explain it again. So let's say this is port number F0/2, and if you allow single MAC address on this interface, which is learned by dynamic, or MAC address learning by dynamic. So if person going to attach a router over there, person can also attach a switch, that opponent, and then after they can connect thousands devices over there. And since the MAC address of your router, let's say I have a MAC address A, every time going to use, no matter this device going to send data to the internet, this one or this one, because this is how your layer 2 information going to change if your frame going to pass through the layer 3 device, which is a router or layer 3 switch. So this is all about for port security. In upcoming section we're going to discuss rest of things.